The desert wind carried the acrid smell of burning fuel across the forward operating base as Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her rifle scope for the 100th time that morning. The intelligence briefing had been clear, brutally so. The enemy convoy approaching their position wasn't just any ordinary supply run. It was the Crimson Division, an elite mechanized unit that had never lost a single engagement in 3 years of active combat. They're calling it the Ghost Road, Lieutenant Colonel Hayes had said during the pre-dawn briefing, his weathered face grave in the dim light of the command tent. 37 successful operations. 0 casualties. They move like smoke and hit like thunder. Every unit that's faced them has either been completely destroyed or forced into full retreat. Sarah had listened to the statistics with the same focused attention she gave to wind calculations and range estimations. The Crimson Division operated with 44 vehicles in their standard formation. 12 main battle tanks, 16 armored personnel carriers, 8 mobile artillery units for command vehicles, and for specialized anti-aircraft platforms. Each vehicle was crewed by hand-picked veterans, soldiers who had earned their positions through combat excellence rather than political connections. The intelligence officer had spread aerial photographs across the metal table, pointing to various positions with a laser pointer that trembled slightly in his grip. They use a modified diamond formation with overlapping fields of fire. The tanks take point and rearguard positions, with the APCs forming the center mass. Artillery stays mobile in the middle, ready to deploy at a moment's notice. Their anti-air units maintain constant electronic surveillance, making air support nearly impossible to coordinate. What made the Crimson Division truly dangerous wasn't just their equipment or formation. It was their commander, Colonel Viktor Kozlov, a tactical genius who had studied every major military engagement of the past century. He had developed what military analysts called adaptive superiority, the ability to instantly modify standard tactics based on real-time battlefield conditions. His unit never used the same approach twice, making them nearly impossible to counter effectively. Sarah had earned her position as the battalion's designated marksman through 2 tours of combat duty and scores that consistently ranked in the top 1% of all military snipers. Her record included 47 confirmed eliminations, most at ranges exceeding 800 meters. But as she studied the intelligence reports on the Crimson Division, she realized that individual marksmanship skills might not be enough against such a sophisticated enemy. The morning sun climbed higher as Sarah made her way to the observation post that had been designated as her primary firing position. The location offered excellent visibility across the valley where the enemy convoy would have to travel, but it also presented significant challenges. The range to the road varied from 600 to 1,400 meters, requiring constant adjustment for both distance and elevation. Wind patterns in the valley were notoriously unpredictable, shifting direction and intensity without warning. Her spotter, Sergeant Michael Chun, had already set up the range-finding equipment and weather monitoring station. Chun was a former Marine reconnaissance specialist who had requested transfer to the Army specifically to work with Sarah. His ability to read environmental conditions and provide accurate firing solutions had contributed to her success rate in previous engagements. Winds running about 8 knots from the southwest, Chun reported as Sarah settled into her firing position. Temperatures climbing fast, though. We might see some thermal distortion once the sun gets higher. Sarah nodded and began her systematic equipment check. Her rifle was a modified M110 semi-automatic sniper system, customized with a specialized barrel and precision optics. The weapon had been carefully zeroed at multiple ranges and had never failed to perform exactly as expected. She carried a mixture of ammunition types, including armor-piercing rounds designed to penetrate vehicle protection and explosive-tipped rounds for maximum damage to sensitive equipment. The radio crackled with updates from reconnaissance units positioned along the expected route. Overwatch 1, this is Scout 7. Dust cloud visible approximately 15 kilometers north of your position. Large formation moving at moderate speed. Sarah felt her heart rate increase slightly, a normal physiological response that she had learned to use rather than fight. The elevated heart rate improved her reaction time and visual acuity as long as she maintained control over her breathing and muscle tension. She had developed specific techniques for managing combat stress during her first deployment, when she had been forced to engage multiple targets while under direct fire from enemy positions. Confirmed visual on lead elements, came another radio call. Count is consistent with intelligence estimates. 44 vehicles in modified diamond formation. The intelligence reports had included detailed specifications for each type of vehicle in the Crimson Division. The main battle tanks were T-90 variants with reactive armor and advanced fire control systems. The armored personnel carriers were BTR, 82 models capable of carrying 8 fully equipped soldiers each. The mobile artillery consisted of self-propelled howitzers with a range of nearly 30 kilometers. The command vehicles contained sophisticated communications equipment and electronic warfare capabilities. Sarah studied the approaching dust cloud through her scope, calculating distances and angles. The enemy formation was moving exactly as the intelligence briefings had predicted, maintaining perfect spacing and coordination. Colonel Kozlov's reputation for tactical precision was clearly well-deserved. Range to lead vehicle will be approximately 1,200 meters when they reach the valley entrance, Chen reported. Target designation Alpha 1 is the lead command vehicle. It's got the distinctive antenna array. The plan that had been developed during the night involves Sarah engaging specific high-value targets in a predetermined sequence. The first priority was eliminating the command and control capabilities, followed by the anti-aircraft systems, then the mobile artillery. The goal wasn't to destroy every vehicle, but to create enough confusion and damage to force the entire formation into retreat. But Sarah had studied the intelligence reports more carefully than anyone realized. She had noticed patterns in the Crimson Division's previous engagements that suggested a different approach might be more effective. Rather than following the standard targeting priorities, she was considering a strategy that would exploit what she believed was a critical weakness in their formation. The weakness wasn't in their equipment or training. It was in their success. The Crimson Division had never faced an opponent capable of inflicting significant casualties quickly enough to disrupt their command structure. They had become accustomed to fighting enemies who required time to coordinate effective responses. Their tactical doctrine assumed they would have adequate time to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. Sarah intended to test that assumption by compressing the timeline to an extent that would challenge even the most experienced commander. Instead of engaging targets in order of strategic value, she planned to create maximum chaos by striking at the vehicles that would cause the most immediate disruption to the formation's movement and communication. Her finger found the trigger as the first vehicles came into clear view through her scope. The lead tank was exactly where the intelligence reports had predicted it would be, moving at a steady pace along the dirt road that wound through the valley floor. The morning light was perfect for long-range shooting, bright enough for clear target identification, but not so intense as to create problematic heat distortion. Wind holding steady at 7 knots, Chen whispered. Range to Alpha 1 is 1,150 meters. Sarah's breathing slowed to the controlled rhythm she had perfected through thousands of practice sessions. Her crosshairs settled on the commander's cupola of the lead tank, where she knew the vehicle commander would be scanning for threats. The first shot would announce her presence to the entire enemy formation, making every subsequent engagement more challenging as they began evasive maneuvers and return fire. The radio continued providing updates from other observation posts. All units, this is command. Enemy formation maintaining standard approach. No indication of awareness regarding our positions. Sarah's finger applied pressure to the trigger with a steady, controlled motion that had become second nature. The rifle recoiled against her shoulder as the first round departed the barrel at a velocity of over 800 meters per second. Through her scope, she watched the projectile's impact with a kind of detached professional interest that separated elite snipers from ordinary soldiers. The commander's cupola erupted in a shower of metal fragments as the armor-piercing round penetrated the relatively thin protection and detonated inside the turret. The lead tank immediately began swerving erratically as the driver attempted to respond to the sudden loss of command input. The vehicle's main gun swung wildly as the automated systems attempted to locate the source of incoming fire. Target Alpha 1 is neutralized, Chen reported calmly. Acquiring Alpha 2. But Sarah was already transitioning to her second target, a mobile artillery unit positioned in the center of the formation. The vehicle had stopped and was beginning to deploy its stabilizing legs in preparation for return fire. Sarah's second shot struck the artillery piece's ammunition storage compartment, triggering a massive secondary explosion that sent debris flying across a radius of 50 meters. The explosion created immediate chaos within the enemy formation as vehicles began emergency maneuvers to avoid the falling debris. The carefully maintained spacing and coordination began to break down as individual vehicle commanders made independent decisions about how to respond to the unexpected attack. Sarah's third shot targeted one of the anti-aircraft vehicles, striking the radar array and eliminating the unit's ability to provide early warning about incoming threats. Her fourth shot disabled the communications antenna on one of the command vehicles, further degrading the enemy's ability to coordinate their response. Each shot required rapid recalculation of range, wind conditions, and target movement. Sarah's training and experience allowed her to make these adjustments almost instinctively, but the physical and mental demands were enormous. Maintaining the necessary precision while working at such a rapid pace required complete focus and perfect technique. The enemy formation was now in complete disarray. Some vehicles had stopped entirely and were attempting to locate the source of incoming fire. Others were moving at high speed toward what their commanders believed were safer positions. The carefully planned diamond formation had dissolved into a chaotic collection of individual units, each responding to the threat according to their commander's best judgment. Sarah continued engaging targets with mechanical precision, her scope crosshairs moving from one vehicle to the next with the kind of smooth efficiency that could only be achieved through years of intensive training. She could hear Chun providing updates on wind conditions and range changes, his voice steady and professional despite the incredible pace of engagement. The morning that had begun with intelligence briefings about an invincible enemy force was rapidly becoming something entirely different. The Crimson Division, for all their experience and tactical sophistication, had never encountered an opponent capable of inflicting this level of damage this quickly. Their standard response procedures, developed through dozens of successful engagements, were proving inadequate for the current situation. Through her scope, Sarah could see individual vehicle commanders attempting to organize some kind of coordinated response. But every time a vehicle stopped long enough to establish communications with other units, it became a target for her next shot. The psychological impact was becoming as significant as the physical damage she was inflicting. As the engagement continued, Sarah realized that her unconventional approach was working even better than she had hoped. The enemy's greatest strength, their tactical discipline and coordination, was becoming a liability when they couldn't maintain communication and command structure. The Crimson Division was discovering that invincibility was sometimes just a matter of never having faced the right kind of opposition. They told her the enemy was invincible. Until she eliminated 44 vehicles in only 18 minutes, the sound of Sarah's rifle had become a steady rhythm echoing across the valley, each shot followed by another explosion or the distinctive crack of armor being penetrated. By her count, she had eliminated 7 vehicles in the first 4 minutes of engagement, a rate of fire that exceeded anything in her previous combat experience. The enemy formation below continued to writhe like a wounded animal, individual vehicles moving in seemingly random patterns as their commanders struggled to regain control. Through her scope, Sarah could see Colonel Kozlov's command vehicle attempting to establish a defensive position behind a low ridge. The vehicle had extended its communication antennas and was clearly trying to coordinate some kind of organized response. Sarah knew that eliminating this target would be crucial to maintaining the chaos that was currently working in her favor. Range to command vehicle is 1,300 meters, Chen reported, his voice slightly hoarse from the constant stream of calculations and observations. Target is stationary, but has partial cover from the ridgeline. Sarah adjusted her scope for the increased distance and studied the target through her optics. Only the vehicle's upper portion was visible above the ridge, presenting a significantly smaller target than she had been engaging. The shot would require perfect precision, as there was no margin for error with such limited target area. The wind had increased slightly as the morning progressed, now gusting to nearly 10 knots with occasional shifts in direction. Sarah could see dust devils forming and dissipating across the valley floor, indicating unstable atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectory. She had a timer shot for a moment when the wind was relatively stable. Her eighth shot struck the command vehicle's main communication array, sending sparks and metal fragments flying across the ridgeline. The vehicle immediately began moving again, abandoning its attempt to establish a coordination point. Sarah's ninth shot caught one of the main battle tanks as it attempted to provide covering fire for the command vehicle, the round penetrating the tank side armor and causing a catastrophic ammunition explosion. The psychological impact of the engagement was becoming increasingly apparent as Sarah observed the enemy vehicle's behavior patterns. Units that had initially moved with purpose and coordination were now exhibiting signs of panic and confusion. Some vehicles were attempting to retreat toward their original approach route, while others were advancing in what appeared to be an effort to locate and eliminate the source of incoming fire. Multiple vehicles attempting to establish firing positions on the eastern slope, Chen observed, tracking several tanks that had broken away from the main formation. They're trying to bracket your position with indirect fire. Sarah shifted her attention to the advancing tanks, recognizing the classic military tactic of using suppressive fire to force an enemy sniper to relocate. The tanks were moving in a coordinated fashion that suggested they were under direct command from an experienced officer, probably one of Colonel Kozlov's subordinate commanders who had taken initiative when communications with the main command vehicle were disrupted. Her 10th shot targeted the lead tank in the advancing group, striking the vehicle's main gun barrel and rendering the weapon inoperable. The tank continued advancing, but could no longer provide effective fire support for the other vehicles. Sarah's 11th shot disabled the second tank's track system, immobilizing the vehicle and forcing it to serve as a stationary target for her follow-up shots. The rapid succession of successful engagements was beginning to take a physical toll on Sarah's body. The repeated recoil from her rifle was causing muscle fatigue in her shoulder and back, while the intense concentration required for each shot was creating mental stress that she had to consciously manage. She had trained extensively for extended engagement scenarios, but the current pace exceeded anything she had experienced in simulation exercises. Enemy artillery attempting to range your position, Chen warned, pointing towards several mobile howitzers that had stopped and were beginning to elevate their gun tubes. Estimate 30 seconds to first round impact. Sarah immediately shifted her targeting priority to the artillery units, recognizing that their long-range capability posed the most immediate threat to her position. Her 12th shot struck the first howitzer's ammunition storage, creating another massive secondary explosion that damaged 2 adjacent vehicles. The remaining artillery units began moving rapidly in an effort to avoid becoming similar targets. The enemy force was now clearly attempting to withdraw from the engagement area, but their retreat was being hampered by the damaged and destroyed vehicles blocking the road. Several units had attempted to move cross-country to avoid the congestion, but the rough terrain was slowing their progress and making them easier targets for Sarah's precision fire. Sarah's 13th shot targeted one of the retreating command vehicles, striking the antenna array and eliminating another communication node. Her 14th shot disabled a tank that was attempting to provide rearguard protection for the withdrawing units. The vehicle's crew abandoned their position and began moving on foot toward other vehicles in the formation. Through her scope, Sarah could observe individual soldiers evacuating damaged vehicles and attempting to reach safety. She maintained her focus on vehicle targets, as her mission was to neutralize the Crimson Division's combat capability rather than inflict maximum casualties on individual personnel. The distinction was important both tactically and ethically, as disabled vehicles could be recovered and repaired while trained vehicle crews represented a more permanent loss for the enemy. The 15th target was another anti-aircraft vehicle that had been attempting to scan for incoming air support. Sarah's shot destroyed the radar system and forced the crew to abandon their vehicle. Her 16th target was a mobile artillery piece that had successfully deployed and was preparing to fire on suspected sniper positions across the valley. Wind shifting to the northwest, Chen reported, adjusting his calculations for the changing atmospheric conditions. Gusts now reaching 12 knots with significant variation. The increasing wind presented additional challenges for long-range precision shooting. Sarah had to account for both the average wind speed and the timing of individual gusts, which required her to observe environmental indicators like dust movement and vegetation sway. Each shot now required several seconds of observation before she could be confident in her firing solution. Her 17th shot targeted a tank that had positioned itself to provide covering fire for retreating units. The round struck the vehicle's engine compartment, causing a fire that forced the crew to evacuate immediately. Sarah's 18th shot disabled another command vehicle, eliminating yet another node in the enemy's increasingly degraded communication network. The engagement had now continued for nearly 10 minutes, and the cumulative effect of Sarah's precision fire was becoming overwhelming for the enemy formation. What had begun as a carefully organized military unit was now a collection of individual vehicles and small groups attempting to survive and escape from an engagement that had gone catastrophically wrong. Sarah's 19th shot targeted one of the few remaining anti-aircraft vehicles, eliminating its capability to interfere with potential air support operations. Her 20th shot disabled a tank that had been attempting to establish an overwatch position to protect the withdrawal route. The vehicle's main gun was rendered inoperable, and the crew was forced to abandon their position. Through her scope, Sarah could see that the enemy force was now in full retreat, with most surviving vehicles moving at maximum speed toward their original approach route. However, the congestion caused by disabled vehicles was creating a traffic jam that made the retreating units easy targets for continued precision fire. Her 21st shot targeted a mobile artillery unit that had become stuck behind disabled vehicles and was unable to move. The shot penetrated the vehicle's fuel tank, causing a fire that spread to nearby vehicles and created additional chaos in the retreat. Sarah's 22nd shot disabled another tank that had been attempting to clear disabled vehicles from the roadway. Enemy force cohesion completely broken, Chen observed, scanning the valley floor through his spotting scope. Individual vehicles attempting independent withdrawal. No apparent command structure remaining. Sarah continued engaging targets with methodical precision, her training and experience allowing her to maintain accuracy despite the physical and mental fatigue that was beginning to affect her performance. Each shot still required careful calculation and precise execution, but the target selection had become simpler as the enemy formation had dissolved into chaos. Her 23rd shot targeted a command vehicle that had survived the initial engagement and was attempting to rally scattered units. The shot destroyed the vehicle's communication equipment and forced the occupants to abandon their coordination efforts. Sarah's 24th shot disabled another tank that had been providing security for the withdrawal operation. The morning sun was now high enough to create heat distortion that affected long-range visibility, adding another variable to Sarah's firing calculations. She had to account for the optical distortion caused by heated air rising from the sun-baked valley floor, which could deflect her bullets by several inches at maximum range. Her 25th shot targeted a mobile howitzer that had escaped the initial artillery strikes, but was now attempting to provide covering fire for the retreat. The shot penetrated the vehicle's crew compartment, forcing the artillery team to abandon their weapon. Sarah's 26th shot disabled an armored personnel carrier that had been collecting crew members from disabled vehicles. As the engagement continued, Sarah realized that she was witnessing the complete destruction of a military unit that had been considered invincible. The Crimson Division's reputation had been built on their ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions, but they had never faced an opponent capable of creating change faster than their adaptation process could handle. The enemy's tactical doctrine assumed they would have time to assess threats, communicate with subordinate units, and implement coordinated responses. Sarah's rapid engagement tempo had compressed the timeline to the point where their standard procedures became counterproductive, creating confusion rather than effective coordination. They told her the enemy was invincible. Until she eliminated 44 vehicles in only 18 minutes, the 13th minute of engagement marked a critical turning point in what military historians would later analyze as one of the most devastating single sniper actions in modern warfare. Sarah's 27th shot had just disabled another retreating tank when she noticed something that made her pause momentarily in her systematic destruction of the Crimson Division. Colonel Viktor Kozlov himself had dismounted from his damaged command vehicle and was moving on foot between the surviving units, apparently attempting to establish direct personal command where electronic communications had failed. Through her scope, Sarah could see the enemy commander's distinctive uniform and bearing as he moved with purpose among the chaos his formation had become. The decision to engage individual personnel was not one Sarah took lightly. Her mission parameters focused on vehicle destruction and unit neutralization, but eliminating the enemy commander could instantly end the engagement and prevent further casualties on both sides. However, it would also cross a line that she had maintained throughout her career, moving from equipment destruction to targeted assassination. Colonel Kozlov is attempting to rally units on the eastern slope, Chin observed, his voice carrying a subtle question about Sarah's intentions. Multiple vehicle crews responding to his direct commands. Sarah watched through her scope as several disabled vehicle crews began moving toward defensive positions under Kozlov's direction. The enemy commander was clearly attempting to establish a final defensive line using whatever resources remained available. His tactical skill was evident even in the current desperate circumstances, as he positioned his remaining forces to provide mutual support and coordinated fields of fire. Instead of targeting the enemy commander directly, Sarah chose to continue focusing on vehicles and equipment. Her 20th shot struck a tank that had responded to Kozlov's rallying efforts, penetrating the turret armor and forcing the crew to evacuate. The explosion created a psychological impact that was immediately apparent, as several other crews hesitated to follow their commander's orders. Her 29th shot targeted a mobile artillery piece that had survived the earlier strikes and was attempting to provide fire support for Kozlov's defensive effort. The round struck the weapon's elevation mechanism, rendering it incapable of accurate fire. Sarah's 30th shot disabled an armored personnel carrier that had been moving to support the defensive line. The cumulative effect of sustained precision fire was now overwhelming the enemy force's ability to maintain any semblance of organized resistance. Even with Colonel Kozlov's personal leadership and tactical expertise, the remaining vehicles and personnel were unable to establish effective defensive positions while under constant accurate fire from an opponent they could not locate or engage. Through her scope, Sarah could see individual vehicle commanders making the decision to abandon their equipment and retreat on foot. The psychological pressure of facing an apparently invisible enemy who could destroy any target at will was proving too much for even veteran soldiers to withstand. The Crimson Division's reputation for invincibility was crumbling along with their vehicles and equipment. Sarah's 31st shot targeted a command vehicle that had maintained communication capability and was serving as a coordination node for the defensive effort. The shot destroyed the vehicle's antenna array and communication equipment, further isolating individual units and making coordinated action impossible. Wind conditions stabilizing, Chen reported, his voice showing signs of the stress that came from maintaining intense concentration for an extended period. Range to remaining targets varying from 800 to 1,500 meters as they continue withdrawal. The enemy force was now spread across a wide area of the valley floor, with individual vehicles and small groups moving independently toward what they hoped would be safety. The carefully maintained formation that had entered the valley had been replaced by chaos and confusion, with no apparent command structure remaining to coordinate the retreat. Sarah's 30-second shot disabled a tank that had been attempting to provide rear-guard security for the withdrawal. The vehicle's track was severed, immobilizing it and forcing the crew to abandon their position. Her 33rd shot targeted an anti-aircraft vehicle that had survived the earlier engagement, but was now attempting to escape the valley. The physical demands of maintaining such a high rate of accurate fire were beginning to affect Sarah's performance. Her shoulder ached from the repeated recoil, and muscle fatigue was making it more difficult to maintain the steady positioning required for precision shooting. She had to consciously focus on her breathing and muscle control to ensure that each shot met the accuracy standards necessary for long-range engagement. Her 34th shot struck a mobile howitzer that had been abandoned by its crew, but still represented a potential threat if enemy personnel attempted to return and use the weapon. The shot penetrated the ammunition storage, creating another secondary explosion that added to the visual impact of destruction visible across the valley floor. Through her scope, Sarah observed Colonel Kozlov making the difficult decision to order a complete withdrawal from the engagement area. The enemy commander was clearly recognizing that his force had suffered catastrophic losses and that continuing the engagement would only result in additional casualties without any possibility of tactical success. Sarah's 35th shot targeted one of the few remaining command vehicles, striking the communication equipment and eliminating another node in what remained of the enemy command structure. Her 36th shot disabled a tank that had been designated to provide security during the withdrawal, forcing the crew to abandon the vehicle and continue on foot. The engagement was now entering its 15th minute, and the devastation visible across the valley floor exceeded anything that military planners had considered possible for a single sniper to achieve. Destroyed and disabled vehicles were scattered across several square kilometers, with fires and smoke columns marking the locations of the most successful hits. Sarah's 37th shot targeted a mobile artillery unit that had escaped earlier destruction, but was now moving slowly due to mechanical problems. The shot struck the vehicle's engine compartment, causing a fire that forced the crew to evacuate and abandon their weapon. Her 38th shot disabled an armored personnel carrier that had been collecting surviving crew members from disabled vehicles. Enemy force now completely dispersed, Chen observed, scanning the valley floor through his spotting scope. No apparent attempt to maintain unit cohesion. Individual survival appears to be the primary concern. Sarah continued engaging targets that presented themselves, but the number of viable targets was decreasing rapidly as surviving vehicles moved beyond effective range or found cover that made accurate shooting impossible. Each remaining shot had to be carefully evaluated to ensure that the target justified the expenditure of ammunition and the potential compromise of her position. Her 39th shot targeted a tank that had stopped to provide assistance to crew members from a disabled vehicle. The shot penetrated the tank's side armor, causing an internal explosion that forced both vehicle crews to abandon their positions and continue the withdrawal on foot. Sarah's 40th shot struck a command vehicle that had maintained communication capability and was attempting to coordinate the collection of surviving personnel. The shot destroyed the vehicle's radio equipment and forced the occupants to abandon their coordination efforts. The enemy force that had entered the valley as the supposedly invincible Crimson Division was now reduced to scattered groups of personnel moving on foot toward the valley's northern exit. Most of their vehicles had been destroyed or abandoned, and their command structure had been completely eliminated. What had been considered an elite military unit was now a collection of survivors focused primarily on escaping the engagement area. Sarah's 41st shot targeted one of the few tanks that was still operational and attempting to provide covering fire for the withdrawing personnel. The shot struck the vehicle's main gun, rendering it incapable of providing fire support. Her 42nd shot disabled a mobile artillery piece that had survived earlier strikes but was now moving slowly due to damage. Through her scope, Sarah could see that the engagement was essentially over. The few vehicles that remained operational were beyond effective range, or had found cover that made accurate shooting impossible. The enemy force had been reduced to the point where they no longer represented a significant military threat. Her 43rd shot targeted an armored personnel carrier that had stopped to collect wounded personnel from the battlefield. Sarah aimed for the vehicle's engine compartment rather than the crew area, disabling the vehicle without causing unnecessary casualties among the personnel who were attempting to provide medical assistance. The final shot of the engagement came as Sarah observed a single tank attempting to provide rear-guard security for the complete withdrawal of enemy personnel from the valley. Her 44th shot struck the vehicle's track system, immobilizing it and forcing the crew to abandon their position. The shot marked the end of the most successful single sniper engagement in modern military history. As the sound of her final shot echoed across the valley, Sarah realized that she had achieved something that no one had believed possible. The Crimson Division, a military unit that had never suffered a defeat, had been completely destroyed by a single soldier with a rifle. The engagement had lasted exactly 18 minutes, during which she had eliminated or disabled 44 enemy vehicles and completely neutralized what had been considered an invincible military force. The silence that followed was almost overwhelming after the sustained intensity of the engagement. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat and breathing as she began the process of clearing her rifle and securing her equipment. The valley floor below was littered with destroyed vehicles and equipment, clear evidence of what had just occurred. They told her the enemy was invincible. Until she eliminated 44 vehicles in only 18 minutes, the immediate aftermath of the 18-minute engagement left Sarah dealing with the physical and psychological impact of what she had just accomplished. Her hands trembled slightly as she began the methodical process of clearing and securing her rifle, muscle memory taking over while her mind processed the magnitude of what had occurred in the valley below. Sergeant Chun was documenting the engagement results with professional detachment, but Sarah could see the amazement in his expression as he counted the destroyed and disabled vehicles scattered across the battlefield. 44 vehicles eliminated by a single sniper in 18 minutes was a statistical impossibility that had somehow become reality. "Command, this is Overwatch 1. Chun spoke into his radio with carefully controlled voice. "Engagement complete. Enemy force neutralized. Request immediate assessment and recovery teams for battle damage evaluation." The radio crackled with disbelief from the command post. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes himself came on the frequency to confirm what he was hearing. "Overwatch 1, say again your last transmission. Did you report complete enemy neutralization?" Sarah took the radio handset from Chun, knowing that her personal confirmation would be required for such an unprecedented report. "Command, this is Captain Martinez. The Crimson Division has been completely destroyed. 44 vehicles eliminated. No organized enemy presence remaining in the target area." The silence on the radio frequency lasted several seconds before Hayes responded. "Captain Martinez, maintain your position for battle damage assessment. Air reconnaissance is inbound to confirm your report. Outstanding work, soldier." As Sarah waited for the reconnaissance aircraft to arrive, she began experiencing the emotional aftermath that always followed intense combat engagements. The focused concentration and controlled aggression that had sustained her during the fighting was being replaced by a combination of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief at what she had accomplished. Through her scope, she continued observing the battlefield where scattered fires marked the locations of destroyed vehicles. Occasionally, she could see surviving enemy personnel moving among the wreckage, checking for wounded comrades or attempting to salvage equipment. The humanitarian protocols she had been trained to follow meant that she would not engage these personnel unless they presented a direct threat to friendly forces. The first reconnaissance aircraft arrived within 30 minutes, a small observation plane that began systematic documentation of the engagement area. Sarah could hear the pilot's radio transmissions as he reported what he was observing to higher command levels. "Command, this is Recon 1, confirming extensive vehicle destruction in target area. Count appears consistent with ground reports. I have never seen anything like this level of precision damage from a single engagement." Within the hour, additional aircraft arrived carrying photographers and intelligence specialists who would document every aspect of the battlefield for later analysis. Sarah knew that her engagement would be studied extensively by military tacticians, attempting to understand how a single soldier had accomplished something that an entire battalion would have found challenging. Colonel Viktor Kozlov had managed to escape the engagement area along with approximately 60% of his surviving personnel, but his elite military unit had ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Intelligence reports indicated that he had already requested immediate evacuation from the combat theater, apparently recognizing that his reputation and tactical doctrine had been fundamentally compromised by the morning's events. The psychological impact of the engagement extended far beyond the immediate battlefield. Word of the Crimson Division's destruction spread rapidly through enemy communication networks, creating shock and disbelief among units that had considered Kozlov's force to be undefeatable. Several enemy units in adjacent operational areas reportedly began withdrawing from their positions without any direct pressure from friendly forces. Sarah's own chain of command was struggling to process the implications of what she had accomplished. A single sniper had achieved what military planners had assumed would require a coordinated assault by multiple units with air support and artillery assistance. The engagement would force a complete reevaluation of current tactical doctrine regarding individual soldier effectiveness and enemy capability assessment. The first ground assessment team reached Sarah's position by mid-afternoon, led by Lieutenant Colonel Hayes himself. The battalion commander climbed the ridge to her observation post with an expression that combined pride, amazement, and concern for how his subordinate was handling the aftermath of such an unprecedented engagement. "Captain Martinez, I've been in military service for 23 years, and I've never seen anything comparable to what you accomplished today," Hayes said as he settled into a position beside her observation post. "How are you holding up after all this?" Sarah had been asking herself the same question for several hours. The technical aspects of the engagement had proceeded exactly as her training had prepared her to handle, but the scale and implications were far beyond anything she had experienced. She had destroyed an enemy unit that military intelligence had considered nearly invincible, using nothing more than precision marksmanship and tactical innovation. "I'm processing it, sir," Sarah replied honestly. The engagement went according to plan, but the results exceeded every expectation. "I'm not sure anyone anticipated this level of success." Hayes nodded and handed her a satellite phone. "Higher command wants to speak with you directly. The General Staff is demanding a complete debrief on your tactics and methodology. This engagement is going to change how we think about individual soldier capability." The conversation with Division Command lasted nearly an hour, as staff officers attempted to understand exactly how Sarah had achieved such devastating effectiveness against a supposedly superior enemy force. She explained her analysis of the Crimson Division's tactical weaknesses and her decision to compress the engagement timeline beyond their ability to adapt. The key was recognizing that their strength could become a weakness under the right conditions, Sarah explained to the senior officers. Their tactical discipline and coordination required time and communication to be effective. By eliminating both factors simultaneously, I created conditions where their training and experience worked against them. The debrief continued with detailed questions about her equipment, ammunition selection, environmental factors, and firing techniques. Military analysts were particularly interested in her rate of fire and accuracy combination, which had exceeded all previous recorded standard for long-range precision shooting. As evening approached, Sarah began the process of relocating to a rear area where she could undergo comprehensive medical and psychological evaluation. The military bureaucracy was taking every precaution to ensure that she remained in optimal condition for future operations and for the extensive analysis that would follow her unprecedented success. The battlefield itself had become a subject of intense study, with teams of specialists documenting every destroyed vehicle and analyzing the precision of Sarah's shooting. Each impact point was measured and photographed, creating a detailed record of marksmanship that would be studied in military academies for decades to come. Enemy radio intercepts indicated that the destruction of the Crimson Division was causing significant changes in opposing force deployment and strategy. Several units were being recalled from forward positions, and enemy commanders were reportedly requesting additional intelligence about the capabilities of individual American snipers. Sarah's engagement had achieved strategic effects far beyond the immediate tactical victory. The psychological impact on enemy forces was creating opportunities for friendly units across the entire operational area, as opposing commanders became reluctant to commit their forces to operations that might expose them to similar devastating attacks. The personal cost of the engagement was something that Sarah would have to process over time. She had taken 44 vehicles out of action and effectively eliminated hundreds of enemy soldiers as a fighting force. But the long-term psychological impact of such concentrated destruction was not yet fully apparent. Military psychologists would work with her extensively to ensure that she maintained the mental health and stability necessary for continued service. The intensity of the engagement and the magnitude of its results created unique stresses that required specialized professional attention. As Sarah prepared for evacuation to the rear area, she took one final look at the battlefield where she had accomplished something that would be remembered as long as military history was studied. The valley floor was still marked by smoke columns and scattered debris, silent testimony to 18 minutes that had changed everything. They told her the enemy was invincible, until she eliminated 44 vehicles in only 18 minutes 6 months after the engagement that military historians were already calling the Martinez Miracle. Captain Sarah Martinez found herself standing before a congressional committee in Washington, attempting to explain to civilian leaders how modern warfare had fundamentally changed. The hearing room was packed with reporters, military officials, and defense contractors, all trying to understand the implications of what one soldier had accomplished in 18 minutes. The committee chairman, a veteran senator with decades of defense policy experience, leaned forward as he addressed Sarah. "Captain Martinez, your engagement with the Crimson Division has forced us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about individual soldier effectiveness. Can you help us understand what this means for future military planning and budget allocation?" Sarah had spent months preparing for this moment, working with military advisors and congressional liaison officers to translate tactical realities into language that civilian leaders could understand. The implications of her success extended far beyond military circles, affecting defense spending priorities, equipment procurement decisions, and strategic doctrine development. "Senator, what happened that morning demonstrated that superior training, proper equipment, and innovative tactics can overcome numerical superiority under the right circumstances," Sarah replied carefully. "However, the conditions that allowed my success were unique and may not be reproducible in other situations." The engagement had indeed created a revolution in military thinking. Training programs for designated marksmen and snipers have been completely restructured based on analysis of Sarah's techniques and methodology. Equipment manufacturers were developing new rifle systems and ammunition types designed to maximize individual soldier effectiveness. Military academies were teaching case studies of the engagement to future officers who would need to understand both its possibilities and limitations. Colonel Viktor Kozlov had never returned to active military service. Intelligence reports indicated that he had resigned from military service and relocated to a neutral country, where he was reportedly writing a book about the tactical lessons learned from his catastrophic defeat. His analysis of the engagement had become required reading in military intelligence circles, offering unique insights from the perspective of the defeated commander. The Crimson Division itself had been officially disbanded, with surviving personnel reassigned to other units throughout the enemy military structure. The psychological impact of their destruction had proven impossible to overcome, as other military units were reluctant to accept personnel associated with such a dramatic failure. The unit's reputation for invincibility had been completely reversed, creating a cautionary tale about overconfidence in military planning. Sarah's own military career had been permanently altered by the engagement. She had been promoted to major and assigned to a special projects division where she worked with weapons developers and tactical analysts to improve sniper effectiveness across all military services. Her input was sought on everything from rifle design to training methodology to operational planning procedures. The psychological evaluation process had taken several months, during which military psychologists had worked to understand how Sarah had maintained mental stability during and after such an intense engagement. Her case had become a model for understanding the psychological requirements for extreme individual combat effectiveness, leading to improved selection and training procedures for special operations personnel. The key factor that many people overlook, Sarah continued in her testimony, is that this engagement represented the convergence of multiple favorable conditions. The terrain provided excellent visibility and shooting positions. Weather conditions were nearly optimal. The enemy approached using predictable patterns that could be exploited. Most importantly, they had never faced this type of threat before and lacked appropriate countermeasures. The committee members took extensive notes as Sarah explained the technical aspects of long-range precision shooting and the environmental factors that had contributed to her success. Several members seemed surprised by the complexity of calculations and adjustments required for each shot, having assumed that modern equipment made such engagements relatively simple. Defense contractors in the hearing room were particularly interested in Sarah's equipment recommendations and her analysis of technological improvements that could enhance sniper effectiveness. Her suggestions had already led to development contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars, as manufacturers rushed to capitalize on the renewed interest in precision shooting capabilities. The international implications of Sarah's engagement continued to evolve months after the event. Allied military forces were requesting training assistance and technological transfer agreements to improve their own sniper capabilities. Enemy forces worldwide were modifying their operational procedures to reduce vulnerability to similar attacks, leading to changes in vehicle design, formation tactics, and communication protocols. Sarah's hometown had declared a special day in her honor, and she had received dozens of awards and commendations from military and civilian organizations. However, she had specifically requested that her current assignment allow her to continue active duty rather than being relegated to ceremonial positions or public relations activities. Major Martinez, there are some who argue that your success was primarily due to technological superiority rather than individual skill, observed another committee member. How do you respond to suggestions that similar results could be achieved by any properly trained soldier with the same equipment? Sarah had encountered this argument frequently during her debriefings and analysis sessions. While advanced equipment had certainly contributed to her effectiveness, the engagement had required decision-making and adaptation that went far beyond what could be programmed into technological systems. Senator, the equipment provided capabilities, but the tactical decisions and real-time adaptations were entirely human, Sarah replied. The choice of targets, the timing of engagements, and the overall strategy were based on pattern recognition and intuitive understanding that current technology cannot replicate. The equipment allowed me to execute the plan, but it could not have created the plan. The hearing continued for several more hours, covering topics from budget implications to international relations to future military doctrine. Sarah found herself serving as an inadvertent spokesperson for the continuing importance of human decision-making in an increasingly technological military environment. Following her congressional testimony, Sarah returned to her assignment at the Special Projects Division, where she continued working on innovations that could improve military effectiveness while reducing casualties on both sides. Her experience had convinced her that the goal of military advancement should be achieving objectives with minimal loss of life rather than maximizing destructive capability. The valley where she had engaged the Crimson Division had been designated as a military historical site, with markers indicating the positions of destroyed vehicles and the location of her firing position. Military units from around the world visited the site to study the engagement and understand its tactical lessons. Sarah occasionally returned to the site herself, using it as a training location for advanced students in the sniper program she had helped develop. Standing on the ridge where she had accomplished the impossible, she would explain to new generations of soldiers that individual excellence could still make a decisive difference in modern warfare, but only when combined with proper preparation, appropriate equipment, and favorable circumstances. The engagement had proven that the age of individual heroism in military affairs was not over, despite the increasing technological complexity of modern warfare. However, it had also demonstrated that such achievements required exceptional skill, extensive preparation, and unique circumstances that might not be reproducible on demand. As Sarah looked out over the valley where she had changed military history in 18 minutes, she reflected on the responsibility that came with such unprecedented success. Her achievement would be studied and analyzed for decades, but she knew that the most important lesson was not about marksmanship or tactics. It was about the continued relevance of human judgment, courage, and innovation in a world that sometimes assumed technology could replace all three. The story of Captain Sarah Martinez and the destruction of the Crimson Division would be told and retold in military academies, inspiring future soldiers while reminding them that true military excellence came not from superior equipment or numerical advantage, but from the combination of skill, courage, and the willingness to challenge conventional wisdom when circumstances demanded innovation. In the end, the engagement had proven that invincibility was often just an illusion maintained by never having faced the right opponent under the right conditions. Sarah had provided both the opponent and the conditions, creating 18 minutes that redefined what was possible for a single soldier with the proper training, equipment, and determination to succeed against impossible odds.